Joining us now is Saudamini Siegrist, who works for UNICEF as a child protection specialist. She has also interviewed child soldiers in war-torn countries like Sierra Leone, and of course, welcome to Arise America. I want to underscore this. Using children as soldiers is as old as centuries old here, and we found this, of course, in World War II, and of course in other wars as well here, especially, of course, as you mentioned, working in Africa. What I think that we find perhaps, and tell me if I'm wrong, a little different here now in this modern age, is social media plays a role here in recruiting child soldiers as well. Could you explain on that?
First of all, I'd like to say that indeed it is not a new phenomenon, and it has been used across the globe in countries and regions somewhat indiscriminately, but in particular in conflicts that involve ideologies, ethnic strife, etc. The current trend that we are seeing now in the use of social media as a recruiting tool is indeed a great and grave worry, which exposes children in another and a new way. It's attractive. Social media is something that attracts children and young people, and so it makes them more vulnerable to that kind of coercion.
Okay, but using that technology, Saudamini, we're still seeing some of the same things that attract, I would assume, children to this. There's social reasons, of course. In fact, we see when they're recruiting other terrorists around the world, there are people who are loners looking to belong to something. Do we see that same kind of message trying to attract some of these children as well?
Yes, I mean, indeed, the tactics for recruiting children change, and some of the reasons as well, but indeed there is poverty, oppression, peer pressure, the use of perceived or real injustice. There are a number of factors that can play in, and outright force and abduction of children to use them, in fact, for acts of violence, which indeed is the most egregious and grave violation.
What we're also seeing here, Saudamini, is that perhaps all parties are guilty in this, in using children on both sides. I'm hearing reports of government-controlled militias are also recruiting children as soldiers as well. Can you give me any insight into that?
Yes, indeed. The use of children by both armed forces and armed groups is something that is very well documented. At the moment, only a few months ago in March 2014, UNICEF and the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Children in Armed Conflict jointly launched a campaign, Children Not Soldiers. And this campaign in particular engages armed forces, government armed forces, of which there remain 7 who are identified as having used or recruited children. And those 7 governments have all embraced the campaign to end the recruitment of children. Now, government-controlled militia is another story, because those are more, let's say, the command control of those groups is less discernible. And in addition, one of the trends we see is that when armed conflict falls between an armed force of a government and fractured armed groups, the asymmetry of that conflict can produce a trend to use children.
Sure. And from Central America to Central Africa, and we've seen this over generations, the tactic of recruiting children. Why? Why children? Why is this such a big thing for people to use children in combat, primarily?
There are a number of reasons. I wouldn't necessarily say primarily, but children become particularly exposed and vulnerable for reasons of their own vulnerability to follow orders. In conflict after conflict, we see that children are more malleable. They have been taught to please and to obey authority, so that makes them more easily controlled in a combat situation, and also through the use of force and threats. And,
sure. And we've also seen, as a matter of fact, in certain areas, I think in 40% child soldiers are female.
Are girls, yeah.
And they're using those for sex and wives and all sorts of things. But there's also another key component here too. With new technology now, weapons are lighter, they're smaller, they're easier to manage, and therefore some suggest that using children is a benefit because they can handle these kinds of modern day weapons.
Yeah, the AK-47 is very well known for that, in fact, and we call that small arms and light weapons. It's using weaponry that children are able to basically handle or be trained to use. One of the things that happens in such situations often is that children are purposefully desensitized. So that a culture of violence becomes something of a norm in which they're exposed, and that's something that has terrific harm for them. So what we try to do is to prevent and also to address those wrongs by bringing children back to their families and communities, which is something that has been successfully achieved in many conflicts, and something that we will continue to do in the current conflicts that we're facing now.
Sure, and we've run out of time here. We are so glad that you are here informing us and at the forefront of trying to make some sort of reasonable change in this whole horrific thing called war, and then of course using children. Saudamini Siegrist, thank you for joining us.
Well,
here.
protecting children is something that we absolutely must make our top priority in all cases and in all conflicts.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you're watching Arise America.